Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday night Dharma gathering. This is Tuesday, March 19th, 2013, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tonight we're continuing a conversation we've had going on for a couple of weeks about the what is called the root kleshas, sort of primary obscurations, or another way of looking at it is sort of places we get stuck. It's kind of a deep topic to look at the most basic modes of operation that we have, which seem, of course, quite normal during everyday life, and to look at them as potentially having a kind of confused element and then a wisdom element, which is what we've been talking about. So we're trying to sort out the difference between confusion and wisdom. And at this stage of the path and working on it, we're not throwing anything out yet. It's sort of an earlier type of practice, which we go, well, we have to renounce or get rid of our confusion. In this case, we're saying it's possible to see the seeds of wisdom within what we consider to be our kleshas or confused patterns of behavior. So we're kind of looking at it more objectively in a way, just like what actually happens. And that's where the meditation practice can come in. It's a more neutral look at our behavior and our states of mind, without the usual sort of manipulation and judgment that is kind of the normal approach that we have. So let's review a little bit. We talked about the three root kleshas or obstructions. The first one we talked about is aggression. Sometimes passion is talked about first, but and we were really looking at anger and basic principle of trying to get rid of stuff, get rid of something, move it away, reject it, move it to the outskirts. And then we talked about passion or grasping as trying to cling on to the object. And this week we're going to talk about ignoring it, which sometimes is a very, very, you could say, potent kind of solution, which makes it look like we're doing nothing, but we'll take a closer look at that. So what I wanted to talk about today is what's underlying all that, if anything. And so we're going to talk a little bit about something called rigpa, or awareness. And that's the Tibetan word. In Sanskrit, the word is vidya. And ironically, rigpa, let's use the Tibetan word, is considered to be sort of a natural dimension of our mind, which is the kind of awakened quality of it. Awakened in the sense that we don't really have to do, or we even can't do anything to manufacture that or create that. It's uncreated, unfabricated, unconditional, natural quality of our minds. So, of course, this is something that the ultimate irony is that we're striving to act as if we invent that, or can generate that, or somehow create the ground of that, but it's said to be already existing in a natural way. So maybe a similar notion could be like oil, is in the ground, and it's a question of uncovering it or digging, and then the oil kind of gushes up and through. So rigpa is natural awareness, really, and unobstructed and unconditioned natural awareness. And you could call it other things. Of course, you could call it the bodhicitta or the Buddha nature. Be subtle shades of difference in the meaning. But if you wanted to experience it and you just could just sit up for a moment, wherever you are around the world, and just, only sitting up from the point of view of coming fully into the present moment. And then just be where you are, on the spot. So you may find that it's nothing at all, no big deal. You also might find that your sense perceptions are very vivid, very clear. You see what's around you. Maybe everybody, wherever you are in your house, you could just look around. It's your house, right? And there's the window, and you're looking out the window at the neighboring property or whatever you have out the window, and you have maybe some plants in your house, maybe some furniture. It's kind of innocent and sometimes called pure perception, just seeing what is in the moment. So of course somebody could say, what's the big deal? Who cares? What's the big deal about that? But somehow before we do anything, before we try to get spiritual, before we try to be intelligent or have a commanding presence, before we even try to be here now as a kind of act, sort of thing to do, before everything happens, we simply have this kind of quality of natural presence and awareness, which is sometimes called ordinary mind. Ordinary mind. And, one type of practice is just to rest in ordinary mind. When we do that, we notice a couple of things. One is that there's a sense of ease. There's a relaxing or even complete opening of any kind of personal agenda. Storyline dissolves. Sense perceptions might be very vivid. Thoughts might arise, but are seen clearly as the thinking mind. We don't need to shut it down, particularly, or manipulate the thoughts in any way whatsoever. So, if you can meditate that way, sometimes, in the midst of your sort of effortful meditation, it can be very, very good to simply let everything be as it is and fall away into a kind of simplicity, a simple state of awareness. And you may notice there's no kind of me and it in that. You can't even find me really in that particular type of experience. If you look for me, it doesn't have the same contour or shape as it normally does in terms of trying to get everything to fall into line with that central headquarters kind of approach. So sometimes you could call this a natural state, and eventually, with your meditation practice, you're going to trip over it, deliberately head for it, give up into it, be shocked by it. And all of the practice we do is, in a sense, intended to uncover this kind of flowing, very fluid, natural awareness and allow us to recognize it and rest in it. And if you meet a Buddha or somebody like that, this quality is extremely present, clear, a great teacher, great practitioner. In Tibet, you can see footage of meditators that are practicing in that way. The quality is not something that can be really described in great detail. It is so fundamental that we would ordinarily miss it and scoot by it. So, most of the time we're trying way too hard, to be. And if you understand the word be, there's no effort involved at all to be. So what we're looking at now is, if that's Rigpa, then Ma Rigpa, or Ma means non, or not, or in the case of Vidya, avidya, which means not, is the opposite of that kind of natural awareness, open awareness, non-dual awareness. So, how did we get there? Who knows? According to the teachings of Buddha, there's a very, very early split, between this feeling of awareness and the arising of a dualistic subject-object kind of relationship. Where all of a sudden me is there as essential headquarters, and everything else would group itself into that, the other. That is the fundamental split. That is as close as we get to original sin in Buddhism. There's no sin in it. It's more considered some kind of fundamental error, in perception, a glitch in the system. All of a sudden, there's a kind of falling away and falling out of that ease and that open awareness. And the world is objectified and subjectified. Now, once we have that fundamental split, that is where our story of the root kleshas begins. Because at that point, we have me and other, and that relationship, to sustain itself, has to have an attitude, right? If you think about, if you want to be with somebody, you need an attitude, And the attitude is basically one of three attitudes, and all the various colors and extensions from that. What's the first attitude? Ooh, I'm looking out. There's the apple. I'm in the Garden of Eden now, and I see an apple. That looks delicious. I want to eat that. So that's attraction, right? You're attracted to that. Then what's another attitude we could strike towards the seemingly objectified world is, yikes, I don't like that. That's scary, that's ugly, that's mean. Not even with that much storyline, just kind of like recoil, And if you want to get close to these things, even at the pre-verbal level of just almost pure experience of feeling of the duality, sometimes if you walk into a space, you sometimes feel there's things in it that you're attracted to, you're drawn to them. There's things that you want to stay away from or move away. And then the third category, which is the one we're going to look at tonight, is a kind of neutral or dull or indifferent would be probably the best word, indifferent quality. So I see quite a few more people have signed on, so I want to just remind you that if you are watching, you can go to facebook.com/David Nichtern in the second window. Don't write comments here below, but go to that second window and open that second window in your browser. Go to facebook.com/David Nichtern. And that is where you will see a scroll of comments that are starting to happen, and people are letting me know they're there. Okay. Seth Wolf from London, hi. Annette is there. Melissa from Sacramento. We are truly an international virtual community here. Okay, and then we have Margaret. Hi, Margaret. Joe from Wyoming. Justine in snowy. How much snow do you have there, Justine? We've got nothing in New York. And Will in sunny Florida. No snow there, I'm sure. Monica. Hi, Monica. Saw Monica at the KD Kirtan this weekend. Scott. Okay, so just for those of you who are new, if you're watching now and you want to participate, you open that second window up in your browser, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and then under my name, Seth has posted the space where you can go to see all the comments at one time. Okay, so assuming everybody's good for that. So this week we're looking at the third, and what, Seth, if you're there, can you post the link to the other two, to the aggression and passion talks over the last 2 weeks? And that way, if you haven't seen those, you can catch up with us here. But the ground is the same for all three. So the fundamental, I want to make a distinction here, the fundamental most ignorance is the marigpa, or avidya, where we literally just, it's sometimes even described as kind of black out, a very fast, kind of like, and we almost, you could say, come to in a world which seems obviously dualistic, and the ego is there, and then the object is there, and there's a relationship between the two. So that fundamental split is, you could say, the fundamental ignorance or ignoring of the space, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to call it. We kind of ignore the open, spacious quality of being, and we can't really find our own ground of our own being. So then, on top of that, then we have the three root kleshas, and again, one of those is ignoring. So this is a more detailed or more specific ignoring. Once the duality is established, how we're going to relate to other, we're going to ignore other. And this is where I found it personally very helpful that Rinpoche used to talk about, instead of saying ignorance, he would say ignoring as the third klesha. And therefore making a kind of active field. And we ordinarily don't think of dullness and being foggy and spaced out as an activity. But if you live with somebody like that, you can study it. If you are somebody like that, you can wake up from it and study it. But in this quality, it's every bit as active as clinging or grasping, or being aggressive and pushing away. So you're creating a relationship to what's around you, based on deliberately, you could say almost, not paying attention to it. And within that, what he used to say is quite intelligence. The ignorance is quite intelligence, because if you are, for example, let's say you're going to space out or zone out, which all of us have tried to do at times. Like, I'm thinking right off the bat, if I want to lie on the couch, and just kind of, tune out. Sometimes you feel that way. Well, I got to set the thermostat in the room just exactly the right temperature. It's either 70 or 71 on the thermostat. It makes a very big difference for the comfort zone. And then the light has to be just right, which means, you can't have any lights on that are going to interfere with your zoning out. And the sound has to be a certain way, So, in order to zone out in this way, we become extremely fussy, interestingly enough. So that's the kind of ignoring we're talking about, where there's a lot of detail to it and a lot of precision in a weird way. So I hope you understand what I mean, and maybe we could talk about that more. So rather than calling it ignorance, it's actually ignoring. And some of us are quite good at it. Just as some of us become black belts in aggression, black belts in passion, some of us are black belts in ignorance or ignoring. So there's a style implied, with that, a fundamental style. The three, our personality tends towards having one of those three qualities more developed than the other two, actually. And as we said in the last 2 weeks, it's not just a question of a neurotic pattern of behavior, or a frozen, we mean frozen by that, frozen pattern of behavior, or habitual pattern of behavior. it's a question of fully developing all of the characteristics of that, and ripening it and becoming a black belt. So there's belts in kleshas, you know. Or, you know, or the basic passion, aggression, ignorance. So some of us could be just, you know, a yellow belt in passion, where we cling and grasp, you know, to things, but we're not really that good at it yet, and we're not really stuck. And some of us are black belt at the klesha of passion or grasping. And when we hold on to something, it's like a boa constrictor wrapping itself around the thing. It's choking the life out of it. Until the point where we realize we've killed the object of our passion with our intensity and our fixation. And then, of course, in aggression, you know, some of us are really have created a whole universe out of riding that energy, and can slice and dice and push things away, and you know, be abusive and all those kind of things, and really make other people feel like shit, you know. So all of these, of course, are in support of developing a central notion of I as having an identity, having power, having strength. So it's all from a sort of egocentric point of view. And in ignorance, some of us are yellow belts, you know, in terms of just we're a little bit spaced out. I think I'm at least a green belt in it myself. But as I say, the awareness is always peeking through in all of these. The Rigpa is like peeking through. The awakened state of mind is peeking through. It's always present. It's the ground. So that's an interesting point, you know. The awakened state of mind is never completely obscured. Because we didn't create it, exactly. And it doesn't really need support or maintenance. But the apparatus on top of it, these three kleshas, need a lot of maintenance. So we're continuously feeding those particular things. In the case of ignorance, if somebody's sort of a yellow belt or a green belt, there's a certain amount of selective filtering out, you could say. It would have that quality of selectively filtering out things in our environment by simply not paying attention to those. And it could be kind of a light dullness, you know, or thickness, you know. Maybe you say something to a person like that in a couple of seconds before they respond. Or you ask them, you know, you were at some kind of event, you say, God, did you see, you know, what that hostess was wearing? It was like kind of such an... No. You know, there's just a kind of dull filter on. And in the passion world, there's a red filter on. You know, everything is sort of glowing and magnetic. And in the aggressive world, there's, I mean, maybe you could say blue if you needed a color, but it's a sharp crystal kind of quality, more likely than that, where things are so clear, but they're very edgy. And every fault and flaw is seen and magnified. So that's what aggression does, you see. So this quality of ignoring, when we become very good at it, there's a tremendous feeling of the original ground of being, which is very spacious and open. And if you're ever around, you know, real good experienced meditators or, you know, deep practitioners, there's going to be some quality of what we call shinjang, or processed, tamed. Not so much all the time the knee-jerk reaction to everything, you know, without being spaced out, but some kind of sense of humor and spaciousness and accommodation, you know, of phenomena. You know, not so whiny and needy, you know. That should be a mark of our practice. At a certain point, we become less whiny and less needy and less manipulative, you know. So it's a beautiful kind of open quality of spaciousness. But in this ignorance thing, it's not a beautiful open quality of spaciousness. It's sort of a dull version of that. The enlightened version is that, it's just that there's tremendous accommodation, and genuine ease and spaciousness. So that's sort of the transformed quality or the natural quality of the ignorance. It's very panoramic and very spacious. And like if you wanted to have a feeling of it, those of you who are out in the snow, go for a walk after this and just kind of, snowy landscape is very, has this quality of spaciousness. There's not so many highlights and recognizable details, and there's not so much opinion happening in it. It's more kind of confining, and just let your mind take that shape. You see. So we can use natural landscapes in that way. Just take in certain qualities from the environment, let our mind take that particular kind of shape. So in this case, if you look at an ocean or the sky or a snowy landscape, it's going to have this quality, this transformed quality of spaciousness. And our mind has that intrinsic quality also. And you can really relax into that. There's not so much need to defend the fortress of ego in that kind of space. You can see the fortress of ego as actually a part of that kind of space. It's not so much like confined. You just see it as part of a very large kind of open quality. Just one expression of it. That's also why, the great teachers, they don't panic about ego, oh, that person's so egocentric or something like that. It's kind of more amusing in a way. That in this vast space, this little individual entity is popping its head up and saying, me, 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 And the truth is, we better learn, it would be good, I don't want to say it would be better, to learn more about this vast space before we actually get old and die. So that we can not be so panicked about death and the dissolution of our very focused point of view into this more open space. We practice dissolving when we meditate. Our very focused, me thing, and resolving it into a more open space, spaciousness. That's one aspect of meditating. So, the ignorance, in its more neurotic aspect, though, is going like, using that spaciousness, or an approximation of it, as part of the structure of ego, to re-fortify our notion of individuality and kind of isolation. And in that regard, it's really very akin, thinking about this, to what we would call passive aggression in Western terms. In other words, the person appears to be very passive and spacious, but there's actually a certain kind of edge to it and manipulative quality to it. So, does this happen in some people more than others? Yes. Stylistically, as I said, we're probably usually, some of us, more from the ignorant family, more from the passion family, more from the aggressive family. The transformed quality of the passion family is discriminating awareness or discernment. The transformed quality of the aggression quality is clarity, as we've talked about, and the ability to cut through, to get to the point, you see. And the transformed quality of the ignorant family is the spacious mind, fundamental spaciousness. We all have all of these qualities in their enlightened form, and we have all of them in their more confused expression. But we're going to tend to express ourselves more through one tone than the other in general. So as we're talking about this, you could sort of like contemplate, how do you express your wisdom and how do you express your confusion? Maybe that would be a good exercise afterwards. You can make 2 columns on a piece of paper if anybody feels like doing this. And on one side write wisdom and the other side confusion. And how do you express yourself? What is your wisdom and how does it express itself? And your confusion, how does it express itself? And then maybe contemplate the relationship between the two, which is something we think of them as being very separate usually, but maybe they have more relationship to each other than we might think. So, the aggressive quality of ignorance, I want to look at 2 aspects. One is a sort of aggressive quality of ignorance, which is passive aggression, basically. You withdraw into the space as if it was a thing that could protect you from the invaders from the other 2 families. Somebody wants to communicate with you and make love to you, and you withdraw into the space. And somebody wants to fight with you and cut through to you, and you withdraw into a kind of dullness and thickness and fog bank. It's like you pull your ship into a fog bank and think nobody's going to see you. Okay, so that's obviously, as we were talking about earlier, there's a certain amount of creativity involved, there's a certain amount of deliberateness to that, a certain amount of manipulation to that, and a certain intelligence to it. The more you look at these, the more I think you will see that it's 2 sides of a coin. The intelligence and the klesha, or the neurosis, are very, very connected. And probably one of the biggest mistakes we can make at a certain point in our practice is throwing out the baby with the bathwater, where we're rejecting all of the kleshas and trying to find a Buddha nature somewhere that is other than those, that is separate from those. So many, many advanced teachings talk about the inseparability of samsara and nirvana, the transformative quality of practice. The Trungpa Rinpoche used to talk about the using our neurosis as fertilizer, and recycling it in a sense in modern language. So, we could look at those things, explore that relationship. In our practice, every once in a while we should just let the practice drop away, whatever technique that we're using. And this is actually maybe another technique, maybe a subtler technique, or no technique at all. So when you're doing a particular practice, like if you're doing loving kindness practice or tonglen, sending and taking, or shamatha, vipassana practice, even if you're doing close attention to the breath, there's a reason for doing all of those practices to cultivate a particular, it's like you're getting a certain channel. It's like XM radio, you're on the loving kindness channel, or the compassion channel, or the contemplative channel, or the mindfulness channel. You're tuning in to that particular frequency. But we should also just at intervallically, and definitely in our post-meditation world, in our life, just allow ourselves to kind of come into natural kind of openness, ease of being, and rest there for a minute, and then not worry about it. Because another mistake we can make is trying to attach ourselves to that experience. Right? Everybody knows that. We think of meditation as a place that we want to go to, and if we're going to get there, it's going to take a particular kind of cleverness and attenuation, So we're always watching ourselves do it. Can never really let go. So I think this is something, when we're working one-to-one, we can talk about more, these kind of things. But I'm just trying to give a general lay of the land here. So the ignorance has the one quality of, slightly edgy, aggressive quality of withdrawing and pulling in our troops, and spacing out. Then the second quality, which is sort of more of the ignorance mixed with the passion. That first one is ignorance mixed with the aggression. Then this one is ignorance mixed with the passion, is where we become attached and we cling to this kind of open state as if it was a thing that we could solidify or stabilize. And this is where the notion of trance states or jhana states can come into play in our practice. And they're considered, you could say, to be sand traps in the golf game of enlightenment. It feels like you've landed in an oasis, but in fact, you're in a pit. So they're pointed out where we become attached to what we kind of an artificial state of mindful attention, or shamatha as we call it, and the idea of being relieved from thoughts. Like we have no thoughts for a minute, and there's such a relief. Space is so compelling that way compared to our overcrowded mind. And so therefore we try to cultivate that. And obviously there's some very attractive energy in that, and that can trip us out in a way. So what they say about Buddha, before he became enlightened, he went through all of those states. There's 4 jhana states, or they're some variation of absorption, being absorbed into space, as opposed to just the kind of unconditioned quality of it, which could include action, activity, ups and downs, thoughts, emotions can just come and go. That's the real freedom that we have, actually. But instead we want to get rid of all those things and have some kind of white, milky space that we can kind of like zone into. So it's very important to understand that that's considered a kind of a mistake, from the Buddhist point of view, to dwell in that way. It's still it's a subtler form of dwelling on something. And so there's attachment, and so there's impermanence, and so you don't get to stay there. And so then you're very disappointed when you get lose that kind of feeling, and back to square one. So that would be the sort of attachment aspect of the ignorance. To get attached to trance states, thought, mind, open states that are artificial in a sense, that have maintenance involved. So this is where some of the teachers of these kind of teachings of Rigpa and Marigpa and Trungpa Rinpoche, I remember particularly saying, he used the expression dumb shamatha. I've heard other teachers refer to it in other terms, but similar meaning. Dumb shamatha is where there's a stupefaction that's happening with our practice, and we're using it to become stupid. But yet there's a relief in it because we're not swimming around in the kind of painful discursive thoughts for the time being, and the relative world that we live in. So we've zoned out. We've created a little bit of a window onto a kind of peaceful, quiet oasis, and that is something we have to cut through. And boy, is that tricky for working with people. Because the Buddha mind is awake, there's nothing that can disturb it at all. It includes all phenomena, war and peace, coming and going, up and down, thought and non-thought, includes all of it. So, it's an important distinction to make, the dumb shamatha. If you're doing your meditation, you're trying to find a quiet space within it, and attaching to that, that is the expression of the ignoring style. If we become attached to the passionate notion of just sort of glomming onto the object of our projections, like we talked about, you're having a fantasy about somebody and what they could be to you and stuff, and then we glom onto that, that's the passionate style. And if we fixate on the object of our mind as, something that needs to be destroyed or eliminated, and we're focused there, that's the aggressive style. So it's just basically 3 different styles for viewing the object of our projections. In the meditative experience, if you really sit and you allow yourself to experience those things as they arise and go, they're all transitory. They're intrinsically transitory experiences. If we become very fixated on one of those 3, all of a sudden our world is based on fixation and doesn't have the fluid, dynamic quality of open awareness. Unbiased. So I think that's sort of it in a nutshell. I hope that wasn't too abstract, and maybe in the conversation we can bring it down to earth a little bit in terms of looking at the practical experience of the ignoring style of klesha, the ignorance style. So at this point, if you've joined recently, which I think some people have, you can go to facebook.com/David Nichtern in the second window and then look at the scroll of comments there and then refresh that every once in a while, and you will see where it says write a comment. You can type in your comment or question, which I would like to invite you to do now, and that we can spend the rest of the time together in dialogue about this topic, obviously. So some comments are there already. Let's see what people are saying, and we'll try to look at what some of the comments are. I also invite some of you, if you like, to talk to each other. That's the beauty of this. It can be 3-dimensional. You can maybe mark down if there's somebody here you want to talk to and friend them, and keep threads going during the week. And also, as most of you know, these talks are available after. They're archived, and we'll post that so you can go look at them anytime you want. And some of the other ones, there's probably more than 50 or so at this point. So let's see, there's some comments here. And at this point, I do invite you to just, enter your comments and questions. Yeah, Lama Luis Riego, I think, is that right, sir? Is this where we can post? Yes, that is where you can post. And good to see you. Maybe you could say where you are and where are you studying? You look to be a monk, sir. Okay. Marianne is from Costa Rica, not used to daylight savings time yet. Yeah. So I think it's supposed to be spring tomorrow, but like any birth, it's taking its time. Okay, let's see. Okay, Jesse has a question. Jesse Marquardt. Hi, David. Glad to see you this evening. The Rigpa we were speaking about, I don't think it ever really comes and goes. Isn't it our attention comes and goes? Yeah. For example, does ignorance come and go and only become visible in this awareness, so therefore we are always aware whether we are aware of it or not? Is this Rigpa? Wow. Hope that doesn't sound too abstract. Thanks. Yeah, it doesn't come and go. So that's almost, difficult to wrap our mind around because in the relative sense, everything does come and go. So, and it's not like it's a thing either. This is this is where you get into a lot of sort of these kind of interesting Buddhist conversations, or even with other traditions. But what is it that doesn't come and go? And is it a thing? So some people say the thing which doesn't come and go is an Atman, or a kind of primordial self. And other people would say, well, there's nothing really you can identify as that. It's just awareness itself. So that's where we get into great conversation. But it's really meant for you to explore within the realm of your own experience. Otherwise, all this becomes theoretical. So we must be pointing to some aspect of or dimension of our own experience. And that is where If any teachers tell you, well, you can't experience these things, they're too high for you or something like that, I'd move along, because what good is that, you know? It's sort of like your parents tell you understand when you get older. And that was annoying. Well, if it's something within your experience, you can understand it now, up into the level at which you're able to access it, as you're saying, within your experience. So keep going with that. Yeah, we're looking at something that doesn't really come and go. And our way of clicking into that is by becoming present or aware of being present. So it's spoken of in that tradition as recognition. You recognize that it's already present. And then there's nothing to do, so it's not. Most of us are not good at not doing anything in this very refined way. So Nanette, I like the colors of the kleshas and how you can transform qualities of aggression, clarity. I need a lot more clarity when dealing with other people's aggressions. I tend to absorb them myself. Also, like to go out to nature to get grounded. Yeah, no kidding. Right now, the crocuses and snowdrops are coming up beneath the snow. I think I need to be more like a crocus. Great, I love it. That's beautiful. Yeah. The colors, Nanette, really what we're talking about is a conversation that's adjacent. We've talked about the 5 wisdom energies of the 5 Buddha families. Seth, maybe if you can find that one, if you could post that link too. Or you can just look back through the archives and you'll find all these. They're titled. So in addition to passion, aggression, ignorance, there's also jealousy and pride are the 2 other sort of neurotic giants or you know, kind of A-team players. You know. And then there's all the colors in between. But each one of those 5 is associated with a wisdom energy and with a neurotic manifestation of it, also with a sort of natural link to environment, to landscape, to color, to shape. It's quite profound, actually, the 5 wisdom energies. And my friend Irini Rockwell wrote a great book called The 5 Wisdom Energies, which I recommend to a lot of people if they want to look into that more. There's a very complete description of that there. Let's see, I'm just going to refresh. Again, we're looking for comments and questions now, so please feel free to write them in. And again, go to separate window in your browser, and in that second window, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and you'll see these. Okay, so Seth has posted the link to the talk on aggression. Okay, so you can see some of these earlier talks. So Tomas Antonio Rodriguez, there is scientific reasoning to back this up, no? I wouldn't be surprised, but I also wouldn't be able to quote any particular study. So maybe if you're aware of some, that would be great. You can maybe put up a link or a reference there. So then Neely, hi Neely, how are you doing this week? Can it be your wisdom comes more from one of these 3 and confusion from another? Neil, you should get this book, the 5 Wisdom Energies, because what you're talking about there is what's sometimes translated as an exit. In other words, your basic family is one of these, and then your sort of way of escaping or manifesting to the world, or the face you put on, is from another. So you can have a look at that. But yes, that's true. What you're saying is true. I've thought about this on and off for a few years now, and I can't figure out which family of these I belong to. My biggest screw-ups come from withdrawing and spacing things out. Okay, at least I think this is so. But I also can see myself in the passion klesha. I have a very hard time letting go at times. And I don't think of myself as aggressive, but I worked as a volunteer mediator, for several years. I was thinking, what does a volunteer meditator do? I worked as a volunteer mediator for several years, which requires a degree of comfort around other people's anger, which I have. That doesn't mean you're angry. That means you're comfortable with other people's. And definitely that cutting through quality, so I see a strength there. Yes. So, of course, all these, one way of looking at the world we're in, all of us, is this display, of the wisdom energies, and the display of the confused expressions of those. And understanding those together is called coemergent wisdom. We understand the relationship between wisdom and confusion, and the fact that they emanate from the same kind of ground. The ground is the Buddha nature, or basic goodness. So that's a very profound view when you see even the trouble that we're in, and even the aggression, and even the clinging, and even the neediness, and the desperateness, and the stupidity, all coming from the ground of basic goodness. That's a shift of perspective. That means there's something workable in every situation. There's always a way to connect to the wisdom in a situation, and compassion. Okay, so Lama Luis Riego is from Delray Beach. Okay. And you have a Buddhist group there, so I'll check that out, and love to learn more about what you're doing and where you are. Marianne is saying, David, would you please talk a little more about the wise forms of these three kleshas? Yeah, the wisdom aspect. So again, reiterating, the passion or grasping or attachment, depending on how you want to phrase that, the wisdom is, there's a certain kind of magnetic quality in it of attraction, and in order to do that, there's a discerning quality. So there's a sort of fine sense of what's good about something. It's almost like the way an artist is. You say, you see a pair of shoes and they're just beautifully made, and the laces, there's just like one shade of brown lighter, and that was a very deliberate choice. So there's a discerning kind of discriminating quality in that. Of course, then the object, and rather than just appreciating that, then we become attached and say, I have to have those shoes. It wouldn't be so easy for you to give those shoes up and let somebody else have them, even if they needed them more than you do. So there's not a letting go in that. But there is discrimination and sensitivity, in a way you could say, to the qualities of things. The aggression one is a cutting through, a clarity, a sharpness, an edginess, a kind of almost brilliance about, what is wrong with stuff. Everybody else is kind of dull and grasping, and you're just, blazingly cutting through to, let me tell you what's wrong with this organization, The problem is that it can get aggressive, and it mixes up with a lot with one's own personal sense of pride and agenda and, kind of identification with being right. So you could say the enlightened part of it is being right, actually being right, without needing to be right, and understanding the skillful means of seeing something clearly and how to actually affect change or open a situation or cut through to more skillful dimension of something. And then the ignorant quality is kind of, as we said, a kind of dullness and ignoring. And then the enlightened quality is that actually looking at things in a very broad way, a very spacious way. For example, I had a friend who used to work for me who was very much from that particular family. His style would have irked some people because it's so slow and spacious. But I noticed that when we went looking for office space, for our company, we'd come out of the meeting with the realtor in the space, and he would have noticed where all the outlets were in the room, or if there were enough outlets and switches. So that's a quality of attentiveness to the sort of bigger space without any, kind of highlights of passion and aggression. You just notice everything, the sort of subtle details of it. So, let's see. So that was a review there, Marianne. So let's see. Thomas Antonio is saying, great observation, Jesse, but let me see what Jesse's observation was. Oh, yeah, okay. So we already mentioned that. Okay, great. So I'm refreshing the screen. You guys can do that too. And please do feel free to jump in. When you're watching these, of course, in the archives, you can see everything we've got, but you don't have the option then of participating. So that's what's great about this kind of live format. So, okay, there's a few more comments. We have a little more time, and we'll try to relate to those. Oh, there's a lot more comments. Okay, this is great. You guys are making some great comments here. Ah! Beck! Great to see you. Wow. See you're still in Boston. I hope everything's well over there. Sharon, there's Sharon, okay. How do you deal with someone who has ignorance as a defense mechanism? I.e., when you have an argument, they withdraw, as you just explained, but it's quite passive-aggressive. How do you deal with it? Yeah. Well, if we look at this as a chess match of these three families, these three styles, you could either draw them out with the passion, or you could cut through it with the enlightened quality of aggression, or you could just leave them to it with the quality of ignorance. And so, depending on if we could free ourselves from the agenda of needing to fix them, which I think is the enlightened quality of the ignorance, is you say there's enough space here for them even to do that if that's what they, for whatever reason, need to be doing right now. And it's not just our own aggression that's coming up that says, I need you to be this way for me right now. And it's not a kind of self-centered kind of thing, but more communicative, in a pure way. Then we could either use the sort of enlightened sword, so to speak, to cut through. And maybe it makes them very uncomfortable for a minute, but that's what we meant by wrathful compassion. Or we could magnetize them out of that. Or we can just let it be, Those are always our three choices. We can use the enlightened quality of any of those three energies as seems appropriate. But the enlightened quality is free from our own kind of small agenda of having our way, having it be the way we want it to be. So I hope that makes sense, Sharon, we always can look back at ourselves too and see, what our mechanism is at the same time. So that's the panoramic view. And then if there's further communication to do, you can just engage, and it's kind of an adventure in a way. It's no less of an adventure if somebody's passive-aggressive than if they're actively aggressive. Sometimes it's very challenging for people to deal with aggressive people. Sometimes that's very hard for people. And we want to ignore the aggressive people. Like if we're at a Dharma thing and somebody's really aggressive, we don't really want to deal with that. We say, hey, this is a sweet, soft, open environment. Why are you doing that? But if we're really full-blooded in our kind of practice, we recognize any of those three as an opportunity to encounter reality, to mix, to communicate. And that's another thing I would say that my experience of the great teachers has been, is that they're fearless in terms of not needing to either manipulate or shy away from anything. So the different styles, at Karma Chuling once, when I was the director at Karma Chuling many years ago, there was a woman there who was quite disturbed, actually, and sometimes I would go like, this place sometimes it feels like a meditation center, and sometimes it feels like a loony bin, depending on the number of kind of more aggravatedly disturbed people who would be practicing there. But there was one young woman there who was actually a very good soul in a way, nice, but she had some personality problems, and she would get very frightened and get very aggressive, including, physical violence. So since I was the director of the place, sometimes it would come directed at me a few times. And, I remember one time I was sitting there with Rinpoche, Trungpa Rinpoche, and she got very activated, and she felt, I need to see him right away. I'm important, this is important. And she was literally trying to smash in the door, and then she wanted to attack me physically, so these things happen, and to the extent that we're not taking it so personally, we have a lot more fluidity. But we can't just back away, all the time from aggression. And we have, these are the energies of our world, so we're trying to deal with them in a more enlightened way, and not just mix in our own confusion and put that on top, so then it becomes, this thing. So I don't know, that's sort of a few thoughts there. So Lama Luis Riego is saying, it is very difficult to know one's own avidya. We need a right view mirror. So difficult. Can you elaborate on my comment if you can? Well, I think you're probably talking about having a teacher. Of course, the whole world is a mirror in this sense. The whole world is a teacher. But in our tradition, we, as you know, we specifically have 3 levels of teacher, which we've talked about in other talks. The preceptor, the Kalyana Mitra, and the Guru, or Vajra Master. And their wisdom is mirror-like. I think that's a very good way of saying that, in reflecting back to us our own wisdom and our own confusion. That's what the role of the teacher is. Not so much to manipulate our situation so that they can maintain their seat, That's kind of not a good situation. So, yeah, mirror-like. The Vajra family is like the mirror-like wisdom. So if we have a teacher, the teacher should embody that to a certain extent and be able to reflect our own beauty and wisdom and our own confusion back to us. And it is hard to see. I agree. It's hard to see our own kleshas sometimes. And the Sangha is a mirror. So even having these kind of conversations together, we can get our own reflection. But I think this means a lot of different things. Maybe that's a longer conversation that we could have in more depth sometime. Neil, you're going to get that book. Okay, great. Margaret, for me, there seems to be a fine line between stupid meditation and just staying open. It's really easy to space out in that open space. I've caught myself many times lately just spacing out away from awareness. There's less edge when you space out. It's a little more comfortable. Yeah, definitely. So if you do work with the teacher would say at that point, either to increase the precision element of your practice, the mindfulness element, or work with specific contemplations, things that require focus and attention, to tune it up. And that's why at a certain point, if we understand the view of all these different types of practices, we can become, somewhat self-prescriptive. At a certain point, you know a lot of different practices. You've received authentic transmissions on them, and you're expected really to kind of, modulate your practice with insight, in terms of what. And then, of course, that's when we're working with a teacher. Then we might ask the teacher, well, I'm really spacing out a lot when I'm sitting, which right away is a very, very powerful insight to have, So then, might say, well, let's sharpen that up a little bit. Let's work with close attention, shamatha more, or let's work with working with something that's irritating more. For some people, Tonglen is very irritating. To take in that kind of suffering, and work with suffering, which brings us into kind of hard, sharp focus, and we can't space out so much. If somebody's suffering, you can't really space out that much. So, anyhow, Thomas Antonio Rodriguez, harmonics. At any frequency other than a harmonic frequency, the resulting disturbance of the medium is irregular and non-repeating. Would you say not operating at the peace and kindness frequency would be disharmonic? And that disturbance in sound mirrors that tendency for humans to commit this original sin. Wow. Sort of very Gurdjieffian there. I don't know. And if you don't mind, I think I got to think about that one a little bit, because it's a kind of interesting formulation. Yeah, and you're quoting somebody there, so I wonder what you're quoting, but Yeah, there's something to what you're saying. I think I'm just going to leave it, Thomas Antonio, and maybe dig into it a little bit more another time. Okay. Elizabeth Rexford, the topic tonight is very rich. So much to reflect on here. Thanks from Chicago. You're welcome from New York. And yeah, this to me, this stuff is endlessly deep. So appreciate your comment. And let's just take Joe's comment and then call it a night. David, it seems that passion has to be an instigator in wanting to learn to meditate. Ah, there's a smarty pants. It would seem there would be a need for the edginess to take hold, to want to investigate what is going on in one's own mind. Two for two. And then sitting up and noticing just the room one is sitting in. And so there seems to be a quality of integrating all three aspects together. Absolutely. And that's why in our tradition, the passion is sort of, I mentioned last week, kind of the most redeeming, if you want to say it in this kind of silly way, because it draws you towards the teachings. There's a certain attraction that happens. And you could say it's the front edge of your experience of getting involved with something. You're attracted to it. You're attracted to the teacher, you're attracted to the Sangha, you're attracted to the Dharma, and you say, this is something I want to check out further. And so that's exactly right. And then you have to put a little edge to lean into it a little bit more, and then relax to sort of see what's going on. So that would be the sort of enlightened quality of those, using the kleshas that got you there to self-liberate. So listen, thank you all very much. There's a lot of great comments tonight. And if you're a beginner to all this and some of the conversation seems a little bit too theoretical or something, please write in and just ask a more basic question. But I'm trying to, in a room it's easier, and online I'm trying to find, how much we've all practiced and studied, and kind of not sort of navigate that a bit. So please do feel free also to write to me directly, davidnichtern@gmail.com. I'm doing the best I can to respond to people. It's a busy life at this point, so if a couple of days go by or longer, if you don't mind just resending your email, and I am trying to respond to every email and Facebook post at this point to keep these conversations juicy and alive. As I mentioned, all the other talks are online, so the more you can go back and look at everything we've all been talking about for the last year or so, and then we're kind of able to get onto the same page for discussion and so forth. As some of you know, I've been doing this one-to-one Skype work with some of you, and there's still some potential for that. If you're interested in that, you should write me an email at davidnichtern@gmail.com, and I can let you know what's involved with that. Only other thing I want to say is a couple of announcements. I won't be here next week because I'm taking a friend for birthday to an opera, and that was the night it was, La Traviata. So we won't have this format next week, so maybe you could use the time to review a couple of the older ones, or if you haven't seen the Passion and Aggression talks. But in 2 weeks we'll be back, for sure, and thenceforth every Tuesday night. So please take care of yourselves. Please be kind to yourselves. Please think of the Dharma as an endless field of exploration, and main dimensions of it being to develop compassion and kindness, and also sort of explore quality of intelligence and wisdom that we have. Think very positively about those things. Think positively, if you can, about the teachers and the Sangha and the Dharma and the Buddha. And, there's a certain kind of self-fulfilling prophecy to having a warm, open, loving heart, and sense of curiosity and exploration and investigation. And, cynicism is probably more its own reward. So, but critical intelligence, we love. We love it. So, I thank you all so much for participating. It's very rich conversation at this point, and a lot of you made great points today. And I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks from tonight. So meanwhile, all the best. Keep practicing so we don't just have to blow smoke up each other's you-know-whats, okay?